used it, and it needs to be fed. So I'll feed it, and by the time it's all risen later on, it'll probably be up to here. And then I'll have lots of starter to use for a couple of loaves. It kind of smells like a bottle return because it's a bit hungry. I just added flour and water to basically double the amount of starter. The way I do sourdough is to use whatever amount of starter I have in that day's baking. That way I have a little left for feeding, but never have to deal with discard. So I'm just going to use about half of what I have here, and then I'll save the rest for the cinnamon rolls. Next is the oil. I'm using canola oil, but I've used olive oil before, even coconut oil. Coconut oil does add a little extra flavor that my kids don't always prefer. So I try to go neutral with the oil. Next is salt. 1 teaspoon per loaf is generally what I do, sometimes a little bit more. And this bread will have oatmeal in it, 1 cup of oats. And I'll hydrate the oats with about a cup of water in a little bit. For the sugar, I usually use brown sugar, but I just had white today, so just used white, and you could also use honey or syrup. Most breads only require about 1 tablespoon of sweetness. I sometimes like to go a little sweeter with it, about 1/4 cup or 1/3 of a cup. And usually I will soak the oats in the water ahead of time to let them hydrate before I really figure out the hydration of the dough as a whole, but this time I just threw it all together. And I'll just add 2 cups of flour to start, and I might end up adding a little bit later, but before I do, I'm just going to figure out how much it really needs. Alright, well, it's a little bit dry, so I'm adding some water, and usually people will add the water ahead of time so it's not difficult to mix into the dry dough. But to help it mix in, I will add a little flour just to make it a little bit more pasty, and it will incorporate into the dough a little easier. Little amounts of water will usually be okay when you're mixing little amounts into the dough. That'll be pretty easy, but anything like 1/4 cup or more, that will be a little bit trickier. So just trying to add a little bit in at a time will be pretty good. So the goal is that the dough is sticky on the bottom but does not stick to the sides of the bowl. So you knead it for like 5 minutes and assess it at that point and try to figure out if it needs more flour, if it needs a little more water. Again, if it's sticking to the bottom of the bowl but not to the sides, that's usually a good sign. At this point, if it's done being kneaded, what you're going to see is it's going to be cohesive. So if you pick it up with your hand off the bowl, it will pull away on its own. It's not going to like break into pieces. If you've kneaded it well enough, it will stay in one piece. After kneading it a few more minutes, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to coat it lightly with oil. And that's a clean bowl. And now it's ready for an overnight ferment. Now onto the cinnamon rolls. I'll start by putting in the starter, saving some to feed, obviously. I don't want to use up all my starter. And now I'm plotting. And I don't actually usually put oats in those cinnamon rolls, but today I did, just add a little bit more nutrition into it because it's going to be the main element of our breakfast. So once again, I usually hydrate the oats ahead of time and let them soak, but this time I just threw it all together and it turned out quite well. So it's about 1 cup of oats to half a cup of water. Next, I had a stick of melted butter ready, and I will be adding all right, next is 2 eggs. The sugar is dissolving in the warm butter, and I'll just let that continue to dissolve while I mix the ingredients together with a little vanilla. And then I'll add the butter and sugar mixture in and mix it up again. Got a really sloshy mixture, so it's time for the flour. Once again, I'll start by adding 2 cups of flour and see where it's at. I always wait until all the ingredients are mixed together to really figure out if it needs more hydration. Obviously, this one does not need more hydration, it needs more flour. So I'm going to add a little flour at a time until it's just right. And again, most dough needs to mix or knead for at least 5 minutes. All right, now I'm going to work on the cinnamon sugar filling, which is a cup of sugar and a tablespoon of molasses because I do not have brown sugar. Normally I would be doing a cup of brown sugar and then 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, maybe a little vanilla in there. Sometimes I'll add a little vanilla in with the sugar and the cinnamon, but this time I did not. After I added the molasses to the sugar, I just mixed it with a fork until it became something like brown sugar. The flavor was a little bit different from brown sugar, but only slightly. It was still very delicious. Alright, adding more flour once again. Cleaning up as I go, as it needs. The more kneading that happens, the more cohesive it is and the more structure the dough has. At this point, I decide I need a little bit more structure. As you can see, the sides are pretty sticky. I'm going to scrape those down and keep kneading and maybe add a little bit more flour. Cinnamon roll dough is more sticky than most doughs, but it still needs to hold its shape. Okay, this is more like it. Still sticking to the bottom and a little bit to the sides, but it's a little bit easier to handle. Has good gluten development. And now to roll it out. And I'm going to be rolling it out until it's about 1/4 inch thick. This was not my favorite method for spreading the butter, so I would normally use a butter knife or something like that, but I am glad that I saved the butter paper because we use that a little bit later, and I'll show you how. It's not as important that the top and bottom of this roll are covered, but you have to have it left and right, all the way to the left side and all the way to the right side, so every cinnamon roll has cinnamon. Alright, here I'm just trying to make it as even as I possibly can. And I normally don't cut anything on my counters without a cutting board, but here I am being very, very careful. A lot of people like to use dental floss to cut their cinnamon rolls. Alright, so as you can see, some of these cinnamon rolls are uneven, so this is where the butter paper comes in. I'm going to use the butter paper to gently push them down so they're all about the same height. That way they cook evenly and they look symmetrical. I covered them with saran wrap and put them in the fridge overnight. In the morning, I took my dough, just divided it in half, and put it into loaf pan shape. It will rise into the loaf pan nicely if I just give it a couple hours. It was a very good day for baking, very cloudy and rainy all day. My oven has a bread-proof mode, which is really handy for times like this. To be honest, these rolls needed 2 hours, not just 1 hour of rising, but the 1 hour did just fine. I baked them at 375 for 25 minutes. Cute. To make the glaze, I just used a cup of powdered sugar and a small drizzle of milk until it created a very drizzly glaze. Hold it steady, please.
It's raining again.
While these are not the fluffiest cinnamon rolls we've ever made, they were still very delicious. They didn't seem doughy or flat. They tasted very good. After the bread had proofed for about 2 or 3 hours, I put them in the oven at 350 for about 30 minutes. The result was a sweet oatmeal bread. Thank you for watching.